Hi, this is Chris Harris, and you are watching the Letterman Podcast. La, la, la,
la. Welcome once again to the Letterman Podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. All right, today we got Johnny Mack. Who's Johnny Mack? Well, Johnny Mack is a podcast host of a podcast that has penetrated the shields of my podcast viewing tendencies. It's called the Daily Comedy News. I did not know that this show existed before a couple of months ago, and now that I have known that it has existed, I listen to it almost every single day. I catch myself up. If I miss a day or two, I catch myself up on the episodes that I missed. It is a fantastic podcast, and I highly recommend it to anybody who enjoys comedy in all of its disciplines. Comedy as a topic, but stand-up, of course, people who want to stay caught up with the main happenings within the comedy world. This is the show for you. Now, it's hosted by a guy by the name of Johnny Mack. John McDermott is his name. Johnny Mack is his persona online and in front of the microphone. His lineage in comedy goes back a long time. He actually started the programming at Sirius back in the day in 2003 when they were in their infancy and creating the comedy channels on Sirius. He was the guy and did that for a long, long time. And really, at the end of the day, Johnny is a part of our broadcaster series. You know, I said this last summer, it was the interns. We had a bunch of interns on throughout the summer. This summer here, we're focusing on broadcasters because at the end of the day, I love exploring the topic that David Letterman isn't just an entertainer. He isn't just a stand-up. Of course, he's good at both of those things. Again, we talk about his wit, one of the sharpest wits in the West. But what is Dave at his core? And that was a broadcaster. That is a guy who got into radio and television and really fell in love with that discipline and is using all of these other things to accentuate that and has become who he has become from the core of a broadcaster. And through that, he influences so many broadcasters out there. John is one of them. And we have a great discussion today about that. We have a great discussion today about all sorts of things in the comedy world. Yes, we talk about Letterman, of course. One of the reasons why we timed it this week is because recently Dave was featured on a story on Daily Comedy News. He they were, ripped from the headlines. President Biden has decided not to seek re-election. Well, there are ripples from that. One of the ripples is something that Dave was going to be doing. And so John and I talk about that. And it's really, really cool to talk to somebody who has this appreciation the way he does, but also loves the behind the scenes stuff the way that he does. We talk a lot about different things in the world of comedy. It is so fun talking with Johnny, and I'm so proud to present this episode of the Letterman Podcast featuring the Daily Comedy News host and mastermind, really, Johnny Mack, John McDermott. Please enjoy. John, first thing I got to ask you, okay, your stage name, Johnny Mack. How long have you been Johnny Mack? When was the first time that happened? And there's so much to talk about today. I'm so excited for you to be here on the Letterman Podcast. When did you start being known as Johnny Mack?
I think I really took to it when I started hosting weekly. I do a weekly show called The Weekly Comedy Thing on the Live One streaming app.
Yep.
So even though my name is John McDermott and it's my name, the N into the M is a little hard to say. I stumble over my own name. When I did college radio back at Fordham in the 80s, I would always stumble over my own name. And somewhere at work at Sirius, people started occasionally referring to me as Johnny Mack. When I worked at Cadence 13, a couple coworkers started calling me Mack. So when I started hosting regularly, just Johnny Mack is a little easier. Nobody really calls me that in real life. Most people will just call me McDermott. But that's become my air name.
Okay. You talked a little bit about your CV here in that explanation. I knew it didn't just start with Daily Comedy News, but I gotta, before we get into going through your CV real quick, and then we can get into just the comedy fun stuff. We can have a great conversation today. I'm so excited about this. I want to tell you that it is very tough to penetrate the shield that is Mike Chisholm's podcast viewing or listening, schedule or experience. And you've done it. Since I have become aware of Daily Comedy News, it has gone into my regular rotation of must listen to podcasts. I love it so much, and I just want to plug it so hard right now that anybody out there who's listening or viewing, like the dozen of you that listen to or view this show, all of you like comedy for some reason, in some slant, in some spectrum of this beautiful art form, you must subscribe to Daily Comedy News. It is a fantastic, short, unlike this one, not boring at all, unlike this one, podcast that comes out that will keep you up to date on all the happenings in all of stand up for sure, but also the late night guys, the current events that are happening within the scene of stand up comedy, but comedy in general as well. John, you're doing the Lord's work. I just love your podcast. How long have you been doing it now? And what was the impetus for it? And I do want to go through your CV because you have an extensive background that I don't know that listeners who just come on board right away will appreciate. So that's where I want to go in this part of what we're talking about, if that's okay.
Sure. The podcast is 5 years old now. I was thinking about doing a 5th anniversary show, and I don't know what a clip show of me reading old news stories would be, so I'm just going to let that go. The show, as I was thinking about this conversation this morning, I'm going to tie this back to Letterman a bit, because there's an emotional component to this program. So if you look at Dave, you create all this wonderful intellectual property, and then you move to CBS, and some suit tells you you can't say Larry Bud Melman anymore. And that's kind of annoying.
Yep.
So for me, when I was dismissed from Sirius, we had built up these wonderful comedy channels for 10 years. And now none of it's mine anymore. It still exists out there, and it's in good hands, and I wish them well, but it's not mine anymore. Daily Comedy News is mine. It's not for sale. It's not going to be for sale. You might like it. You might hate it. You might think I suck. I don't care. It's mine. So that's my baby there. And that's where that comes from. The emotional need to have something that I control's a weird word, but nobody's going to take it from me.
Yeah. And that's you're preaching to the choir. That is so important. I've had very preliminary conversations with this show with folks who might hey, we can help you accelerate the show, and we can do this and we can do that. And I just said, nope, that's not my, if Worldwide Pants were to come along, that's one thing. And I mean, perhaps the right thing, that might be another, but watching and listening to you do what you do, it's apparent that you get to do whatever you want. For example, your show's clean. It's very, very terrestrial radio like, unless you have someone like Alex Bennett on a few weeks ago, and then you can go and you can break the rules, and so you can make these rules in the structure, and then you can break out of it, have a lot of fun doing it. I love that that's the case. Also, you seem to be building a monetization platform for podcasters, or you're a part of one as well. Is this your baby as well, the business end of it?
Yeah, sure. My partner, Mark Francis, and I, we have created a network called Calaroga Shark Media. Calaroga being the street in Australia he grew up on, Shark being the nickname for my long gone golden retriever. And you got to call these things something. So that's why it's called that. And so I had asked Mark to work with us on a podcast called Palace Intrigue, and that's about the British royal family. The original program design there was going to be, all right, Prince Philip's 97, the Queen's 93, there's some predictable events coming. We'll talk about Kate Middleton, what she's wearing and all that. And then that blew up thanks to Meghan Markle, frankly. We had the whole Megxit arc. The Queen dying is a big news story, right? That's the Super Bowl of royal events. But I sound like this, and Mark, growing up in Australia, I'll tell you a story about that in a second.
Sure.
Can do a British voice. So I asked Mark to host it, and we started doing that. So that's 10 minutes a day. Daily Comedy News is 10 minutes a day. And we decided, all right, let's do short form stuff. We call it lovingly the McDonald's of podcasts. If you want to pay Meghan Markle $2 million an episode, go nuts and good luck making your money back. We're fast, cheap, and tasty. I'm not making a documentary. I'm telling you that Jerry Seinfeld's going to win an award. Rip and read, publish it, and repeat. That's what we're doing there. So back to the story with Mark. I'll just catch your audience up. So I ran the Sirius XM comedy channels for 10 years.
There we go.
One of the channels, the dirty one, is called Raw Dog Comedy. And we had a sales opportunity to something related to Australia. I forget why, but the point was, can you guys put together an hour of Australian comedy? Sure. So we needed somebody to host it. And I asked Mark to host it. However, Mark, having lived in New York City for 25 years, didn't sound Australian enough, even though that's where he grew up. His A's had flattened out to New York A's, and so we had Sal DeLeo, who was our imaging guy, Italian American from New York City. He went in and did the Crocodile Dundee G'day Mate, and it sounded right to American ears. To Australian ears, it probably sounds like garbage. Same thing. I'm sure if you grew up in Liverpool, you might listen to Mark's accent and be like, I don't know if this guy's from around here, but to American ears, it works just fine.
Oh, it's fun that we can still get away with some of that stuff. I mean, my wife and I watch Breakfast at Tiffany's every year, and watching Mickey Rooney play, somebody from somewhere in the South Asian geographic region. It's cool that we can still get away with some of that stuff. John Wayne used to do the same thing. John Wayne I think John Wayne played Genghis Khan or something like that. I think it was a different time when you could get away with stuff like that, and it's fun that you can still do it.
Yeah. We can get on a whole tangent there of acting. Now, I think in some roles, casting is who you cast on the role makes sense. I would be a terrible Queen Elizabeth, for example. That I wouldn't be good there. But, you get into some of this stuff of, can so-and-so play so-and-so? And at some point it is acting. That's what an actor does. They portray a different person. Where that line between, I don't want to get on a whole tangent here of, can I play Queen Elizabeth? No, but could, like I always say, I would be a terrible James Bond.
Yes.
But I would be a pretty decent Mr. Cunningham if you want to reboot Happy Days. So somewhere in there, it would work.
I went that direction for a reason. Okay. One of the things I'm so proud of with this show is something that I won't be able to really talk about. There are things that have happened in the Letterman world with some of the staffers that have happened as a result of this show. Good things, like really good things. And I'll never be able to talk about it. There is one thing, though, that I can talk about that has happened as a result of this show, and that is reconnecting you and Alex Bennett. And I am so I'm so delighted about that. After you and I had spoken and Alex's name came up, the next week when I went on Alex's show, like I normally do, I said, "Hey, do you remember a guy named Johnny Mack?" He's like, I'm doing a show. I'm really excited about it. And he had a blast with you. And I was like, oh, we were kind of the catalyst for that. I'm so excited. Now, how does this relate to what we were talking about? Well, for I think it was 3 years, Alex Bennett was hosting, I believe it was in Houston, and his name was James Bond, and he had an English accent. Now we're talking about a Jew from San Francisco making his way in the radio world back in the day. And I don't know if he applied as a lark and sent them a tape of him as a British accent, but he got the gig. And for 3 years, he spent time softening that accent. So eventually he didn't have to have it anymore. But I just, you talk about a time in broadcasting that is just so, everything has changed so much. One of the things that hasn't changed, and we're doing this summer, you're the second, and I think we're going to have probably 2 or 3 more broadcaster that we've had on the Letterman podcast. And the reason that we're doing that is because, there's been this premise that's been out there forever. You read the Bill Carter books, Jason Zinnemann's book, of course, talks about it as well. David Letterman, not a stand-up. I mean, he learned the discipline, but he's not a stand-up. He's a broadcaster. And that's always been the distinction that was made, all throughout the years. It was made, the comparisons between him and Leno and many other times brought out there that he's a broadcaster. And the influence that he has had on people in the broadcasting business, whether it be radio, whether it be television, cannot be understated. A huge group of the enthusiasts of this show are people who work in television and have forever for different affiliate stations all over the place, all different roles, technical, in front of the camera, or the microphone, that sort of a thing. What do you think David Letterman's influence on broadcasters comes from? Are you one of them? Are you influenced by this guy?
Absolutely. It's the tearing down of the establishment that came before, just the informality. I really zero in on those first 5 years of late night.
Yeah.
And it was an insiders club. It's 12:30. Nobody's watching, but the people in the room with Dave and me and you, and there's 6 of us that know about this show. I was thinking of comparing it to a cool band. So I'll specifically shout out U2.
Yep.
Being an Irish American from New York City, I knew about U2 earlier than most people did, just because, I don't know, it just was in the bars. Well, I was 14, I wasn't in the bars, but they were around.
Yep.
And you had an album like Live at Red Rocks, and you were in the know, and it was super cool. You go 10 years later, U2 is doing Zooropa in stadiums, and it's cool, but it's not as cool. And that's more like late show to me, Zooropa.
Yep.
But you go back to those early days and it's, hey, here's this cool band and only we know about it. So you look at Dave just tearing down the establishment. He's making fun of the bosses on the air. It's, hey, we're going to have Chris Elliott come out and do something, and if nobody laughs, we don't care. It just had that whole vibe of okay, what can we do that hasn't been done before? Or I think for me, inspirationally, let's not do it the way everybody else has done it. There was a way to do the Tonight Show. Let's not do that.
Mm-hmm. And going back for you personally, there's a point that you got into comedy and there's a point that you got into broadcasting. How did that happen? Which happened first?
I got into broadcasting first. I started at WR New York City in 1992 as a part-time board op. I left there 10 years later as I was the acting program director. They were between PDs. The new PD, John Manelli, was coming on board. He asked me to stay, but I had lined up my own gig to go PD a station out on Long Island. So I had already left. Loved OR. That will always be home to me. But there I did 10 years of news talk, and I produced Dr. Joy Brown, which was a psychologist doing relationship questions. I did a lot of Bob Grant political stuff back in the day. One day I wound up unemployed, and my friend Sean said, call Jeremy Coleman. He needs somebody to run comedy at Sirius. And this was before anybody knew what satellite radio was. And I had been out of work and I called Jeremy, and he's like, when can you come in? We're doing our schedules. And he said, I have free time this afternoon. I was at a Toys R Us buying Christmas gifts for my children, dressed pretty much like I am. I ran home, threw on a suit, jumped on the Long Island Railroad, thought about what comedy programming could be for 30, 40 minutes, met with Jeremy that afternoon. And I remember, and I found out from coworkers after, some of the other people they were looking at were comedy insiders and people who in 2003 definitely knew a lot more about comedy than I did. But I took the approach of, oh, this is just music radio. We're going to play the hits. We're going to play Dane Cook instead of playing U2. And I treated it the same way as hits radio. And apparently that was the right answer. Jeremy decided he wanted a radio guy, not a comedy guy. For the first 6 months of that job, the entire comedy department was me. And when I got there, someone else had loaded some comedy albums into the system. If you had played every single clip in the system when I got there on day one, you would start repeating things in 10 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So I spent the first 6 months as a staff of one, because I didn't need anyone else, loading comedy albums. So here's this new guy who sits at his desk all day with headphones on, and all you see is me sitting there going, and, who's this weirdo listening to stuff? But I was just like inhaling the best stand-up comedy, just loading things in. And then eventually, got some other people in, and we started doing live shows and more stunts. But that was 2003. And then a decade later, when I found myself at Cadence back doing more traditional news talk, podcasting stuff, if I raised my hand to get involved with something comedy, people were like, you're the news talk guy. And I'm like, So I've been like, why are you running comedy for 10 years? And then back to, well, you're a news talk guy. It's radio, audio. Like you said, things have changed, but the book was always, if you wanted to get into this medium, don't worry about format. Look at Dr. Johnny Fever. Hey, we're a country station, put on a cowboy hat and fake it. We're a rock station. Okay, now I'm Dr. Johnny Fever. I'm Johnny Sunshine, whatever you need me to be. So I was a comedy guy for 10 years and, came to love it.
This is very, very cool. I've got a whole bunch of tangents that we can go on. And by the way, I'm going to tease, again, our dozen or so listeners and say the reason that John's on this week specifically is actually David Letterman appeared on Daily Comedy News on a story this week. And I'm going to ask about that. We're going to get into Letterman, but I'm super fascinated by this stuff. And again, I'm the guy, when I listen to shows, I always, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I want to pull back the curtain. I want to go behind the scenes and talk about these things. Going back to 03 at Sirius, when it was in its infancy and it was kind of figuring itself out. This is when it was Sirius, and then there was XM. It's kind of like, there's VHS and Beta back in the day, or Blu-ray and HD DVD. There's different brands out there. They're trying to figure out this new medium. You're jumping down the comedy rabbit hole. Then there's also technical problems. I believe on one of the, I don't know what it was. It might have actually been Alex's interview now that I think about it. But every once in a while, I'll listen to Daily Comedy News, and you throw in your little flourishes in between stories. You'll throw in your little bit of personality, and throw in these little tidbits. One of the tidbits you've thrown in is that I believe you were trying to upload, or not upload, but digitize, I guess, comedy albums back then, and some of the comedy albums just wouldn't do it from a technical standpoint. Richard Pryor's, I think, was one of them.
Yes,
you get into these old albums that are their classic stuff, and you can't get it from a technological standpoint. You couldn't even put it in. These are some of the early infancy challenges of Sirius, right?
Yeah, specific to that story, I remember my boss, Jeremy, asking me how come we didn't play much Richard Pryor, right? Yeah. On any list of the all-time comedians, Pryor finishes either first or second. Absolutely. And Carlin in the other position. So why aren't you playing Richard Pryor? And the answer was, at that time, the recordings sounded thin, and then when you put them through the bandwidth of satellite radio, which isn't quite as wide as an FM radio, or definitely not a direct download, it sounded terrible coming out of the speakers. And I remember one of the consultants had a sign that said, in radio, audio is a rather important element. So I didn't play stuff that sounded bad. Now, since they remastered the Pryor collection and it sounds fantastic, but also back then, there were a lot of homebrew comedians. There was a guy named Louis C.K. who had something out that probably could have been recorded a little better. So you want to play these things, but if they sound like garbage on the air, you just can't play them.
And again, like, I love that story so much, because the generation that's out there right now that has so much of this comedy on demand, and it's everywhere, and much of it does sound beautiful, crystal clear, all of that. It's just like when MP3 technology showed up. And I mean, I'm a guy, I love my music and always have loved my music. And I was one of the people when everybody was jumping onto the MP3 revolution and Napster and all that stuff. I was like, yeah, but it sounds like garbage. It sounds terrible. I want my music to sound like I had studio quality speakers in my house when I was really, really young. Like, that's the stuff that I love so much. And as you're building this new technology, that must have been very frustrating coming from where you came from.
I'll actually go the other way with that as my answer, especially over the last 20 years. We're all listening on iPods. So yes, we can go hang out in your basement with your awesome speakers and appreciate what George Martin did. But modern songs are crunched down to sound good in the pods, like on my podcast. I use a program called Descript to clean it up. It's fast. Is there a better edit to be had if I sit there for an hour? Absolutely. But hitting the one button click of, that eliminates all the pickups, it just saves me so much time. And I'd rather get moving, because most people who are listening are going to be in the car or on a treadmill, and they're not listening for the audio quality. They're listening for the audio content. Yep. So I'll actually go the other way and be like, pretty good is pretty good. I'm not submitting a podcast for a Grammy. If you want to do something Grammy, we'll mix it properly. But sometimes fast is good. And then back to, the Sirius bandwidth, same thing. Oh, one of the tricks I was taught by my elders is mix something on the worst possible speaker, because if it sounds good on the worst possible speaker in your 1974 blown out GM with the speakers are gone, if it sounds good on that, it'll sound good on your basement setup with the 50-foot speakers.
I love that. And to be very, very clear, MP3 now sounds completely different than MP3 back then. Like back then it was sort of the Wild West. They were all sort of figuring it out. Now you go into Apple Music, and I mean, they've got the lossless quality, and things have improved drastically since then. But yeah, I get the point. So like Letterman, he shows up on this show and it's zany, it's all of these things, but you go back to base and Dave is always there as a broadcaster and presents things as a broadcaster. We talk a lot about the moment with Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman, early on in late night's run. And I just love the way that Dave handled that. And now it was a work. There was something there, but very few people were in on that work. And the way that Dave, when Lawler got up and smacked Andy, and as they went through that, the lead up to that, he didn't treat it like he was a stand-up. Although his razor sharp wit was there, he was still a broadcaster. And I think that style, whatever the alchemy is that led to that, he's got the greatest wit in the entire world. But at the same time, he does know how to run a board. He does know how to talk to the people in, like to Hal Gurney and the people in the control room. And he talks to the technicians that are around him, knowing everything about that. You're that guy too, right? You know how all of this stuff works behind the scenes.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, and I think for some reason, I think that translated to us as the viewer. I just think that that's a part of the magic that is Letterman.
When I was at WR in the 90s, there was a patch bay. So what a patch bay is if you want to connect a piece of equipment to a different piece of equipment. So I want to connect the cart player to the reel-to-reel machine in the corner, and there's not normally a direct connection. So I stick a cord in one hole and another hole, and it connects to each other. WR at that time had this rat's nest of patches that nobody ever hardwired all these things. And us knucklehead 20-year-olds, we used to play patch bay roulette. And the game was, okay, you have to pull a cord out without taking us off the air, or you have to forfeit the game. And we'd be like, all right, let me see. Cart 3 doesn't really need to be up to reel 2. Let me pull that. Okay, you go. And we would just play patch bay roulette. But yeah,
it's like Jenga.
Oh yeah. Oh no. I could run a board back in the day better than anyone. Don't tell the bosses from 30 years ago. We would do things. So in network radio, everything is hard timed. For example, an hour of radio would end at 58:50, meaning 58 minutes, 50 seconds past the hour, which leaves you 1 minute of commercials and a 10-second ID. Then there's a newscast that goes exactly 6 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And we would, in New York City, Market 1, challenge each other. Can you run the board with the speakers off? Just by looking at the clock. Okay, it's 58:50. The needles just went dead. Click. Let me hit the commercial. Okay, it's been 60 seconds. How tight can you run a board without listening? And we would police each other, even on a normal day. If you were running the board, if you left a quarter second of dead air, we would come in and razz you.
Okay, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly, it's the same culture that Dave grew up. Zinnemann's book, Jason Zinnemann's book about Dave talks about the one thing that I love about that book very, very, very much is how he went back to Dave's days in radio and early TV before, as he was, learning the craft of broadcasting and all of that stuff, as he was running the technical things. And there's a story about them, this is on a television station, but at the end of the day, the national anthem plays, right? And there's a graphic of the station and the national anthem plays and the broadcast day is over. And then it goes to, color bars or snow for a few hours before the next broadcast day begins. And they would do things like this. And there was a guy who was in the booth with him, or in the studio with him, who said, you know what, I can rig it so when it shows after the national anthem plays, the picture of the television station, of our television station, of the office of our television station, will blow up. And we can make it blow up and it'll explode and it's going to be the greatest thing in the world. And these guys were there going, oh, this is going to be the best ever. And they did it and no one noticed. And it was one of those things where this is that kind of behavior that you're talking about, where it's like, okay, we've got everything, tight as a drum. let's see if we can mess with it, because antics are just human nature. Yeah, I see through lines here. I feel through lines here. Do you enjoy being in front of the microphone or behind the microphone more?
For the first 20 something years of my career, I was happier behind the scenes being a producer. I had no aspirations of being talent. I'll use the word very
Sure,
loosely, but
sure.
being on the mic. So what happened was, after the Sirius gig ended, I started running the comedy properties for what was then called Slacker Radio. Right now it's called Live One. I still do that.
Yep.
And we were developing the weekly comedy thing, which is a 1 hour show. You can't really do a comedy countdown because the charts just don't move enough at all. And legacy albums, you might go, and number 3 is Dane Cook's album from 2004. Like, it doesn't make sense to do a countdown. So we came up with a format that's basically, news of the week. Can I tie together a theme based on a week? There's a segment called Thanks Captain Obvious. So, like, obviously it's July 4th. So let's play some July 4th themes, that kind of thing. So as we were developing that, we were trying out hosts and nothing was working. And I was inspired by Phil Collins of Genesis. So if people don't know the story, Peter Gabriel was the lead singer for Genesis and he left. And they started auditioning people and nothing was working. And Phil Collins, who was the drummer during the Peter Gabriel years, said, "Can I try it?" And then Phil had a great career. So I just raised my hand. I'm like, I don't know. I'm writing the thing anyway. Let me just try voicing it. And here we are 10 years later. And then from that show, I had so many leftover stories. I decided to create Daily Comedy News as the daily. But now, being on this side of the mic all the time, I'm enjoying it. I also host something called 5 Good News Stories, which was my wife's idea, and kind of heavily influenced by something Krasinski did during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
But it's me saying 5 news stories that are all good news. And it's, cat rescues and Guinness records and a quirky story, what we would call a kicker in show prep. And that is super popular. So I just enjoy talking now, and it's fun. It's different. I still have my managerial role at Calaroga Shark Media. So I get to do all of it. I was doing an ad campaign before I jumped on the microphone with you. So I still have my suit t-shirt version, but I still have my suit persona, but I love being on mic now. And it's not something I ever aspired to do.
When I when I came on your show as a guest, I wanted to do some research and whatnot and see what the show was. And when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, oh, this is a guy kind of like Alex, except a lot younger still. Alex is in his 80s now, but here's a guy who's been in radio forever and has been assaulted by the changes of the times. And okay, here's a guy who has been on mic forever and is now finding creative ways to not be that guy. But as I've listened to it, I've put pieces of your story together, and it is delightful to me that you have found, like, very similar to me. I'm a financial planner by trade, but have actually always wanted to do this, inspired by Dave and some of my other broadcast heroes, and never had the availability to do it. So the times changing the way they have made it so it's available for me to do it. And it's just so much fun. And it appears that you're having so much fun doing it.
Yeah, the democratization of the media has been just fantastic. For example, a financial planner is hosting a weekly show about David Letterman. We couldn't do that in 1985.
Exactly.
And boy, as a David Letterman fan, I like listening to this. I like that some other guys are doing a Star Trek show. I like that some other guys are doing a show. There's one I love, Dave and Dave Unchained. They do a 4-hour show once a month about Van Halen. Like, that's amazing to me. I love it. It's one of my favorites, but we couldn't do this stuff. So, I just come back to that same mindset of, look, I'm doing Daily Comedy News. If you think it's great, awesome. I love you. If you don't think it's great, that's fine. I'm just happy doing it. It's fun.
It's neat how, though, you have brought so much of the polish that you learned in classic broadcasting and the tips, tricks, and techniques of that. It's extremely evident. Again, the program, I cannot gush about it enough. You talked a little bit earlier about, format doesn't matter, and I get that. It totally makes sense. Learn the craft, understand really how it works. But that being said, a DJ goes goes along and they have 5 or 6 different formats, and then suddenly they fall in love with one along the way. It feels like that's who you are when it comes to comedy. I was I don't usually for these things get nervous anymore, but I'll tell you this, prepping for this episode today, the nervousness that I have is very similar to that of Jason Zinnemann or Bill Carter or whatever. You know a ton about comedy. There's a lot of comics that you know about that none of us as the public have ever heard about. It feels like as this format, as you kind of entrenched into this format, it attached itself into the emotional components of your biology. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I look at this, I compare it to my humble brag. I've run 2 marathons, right? So
Boy.
I've ran 2 more marathons than most people. However, people that know how to run are way better at it than I am. They are faster, they are stronger, they can do it better. So when I look at comedy, I know more about it at this point than 98, 99% of the general public. However, I won't take on Jason Zinnemann in a conversation. He'll destroy me. I won't take on Bill Burr in a conversation about stand-up comedy. He'll destroy me.
Yeah.
So and this goes back to when I was at Sirius, I approach the programming from the everyman perspective. So I have maybe a little more expertise or a couple more war stories, but I like to come in at eye level. They taught us in radio, and it was true in comedy and it's true in podcasting, play the hits.
Yeah.
So if there's a story about Jerry Seinfeld, that moves up to the front of the show because that's what Joe Public knows. Joe Public knows Jerry Seinfeld. If you want to go deep and start talking about a comedian that nobody knows and you put them in the headline, well, you get fewer downloads. So the big story is, hey, did you see Will Smith slap Chris Rock? Ride that horse for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. And it's funny, like, pop music versus there's a comparison that has been made, and I think it was made originally in the Late Shift. I think Carter made it talking about Letterman and Leno, and people would talk about the general appeal. It might have been in War for Late Night. It might have been his second book actually, but somewhere along the way I learned it and I was like, yes, this is the perfect analogy. Whereas Leno is like, he's like a pop music. He's like a Britney Spears or a Justin Timberlake or whatever. Letterman is like Pink Floyd. and it might not be as easy to access, but at the same time, the experience is a deeper, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's such an apt description for comparing those two. And there's a place for both. And if you want to make a career in monetization, pop music is something where, you know what, that's something that kind of needs to happen. I can certainly see how that would happen in comedy. That being said, for 5 years, you have gotten to watch folks show up from the club of 27 people to going to stadiums, and literally and figuratively for that matter. The analogies actually completely match right now. The one that I see that has happened, you have seen the rise of Nikki Glaser as you've done daily comedy news, where this is somebody who might have been like a B or C level story. If you have time for that story, there are many stories you leave on the table because it's just you want to keep the time concise. It's very clear about that. But now she's one that makes the headlines of your show. You must have seen a few of those in your run.
Yeah, comedy has always been about 18-year overnight successes, and Nikki is one. She was sailing along. She's no more or less funny than she was 3 months ago. But eyes were on her at that roast of Tom Brady, and she crushed. And went next level. Now, what's interesting about Nikki is that very same week, she had a special on Max, HBO Max, whatever the branding is, that didn't have any buzz. And that on paper, coming off the roast, should have been huge. And I really don't hear anybody talking about that special. They're talking about her appearance on the roast, but her star has shot up, and maybe that HBO special was too soon after the roast. Like if that hadn't existed and you announced today Nikki Glaser is going to have an HBO special in September, oh wow, that's big news. But timing is everything. Let's give John Mulaney a sitcom on Fox. Well, that's the all-time lowest rated sitcom of all time. Hey, imagine if before the scandals, imagine if Louis C.K. had a sitcom on HBO. That'd be huge. Well, that happened. Nobody watched it. They watched the FX one, but nobody watched the HBO one. So it's all timing there. I remember there was a lot of jealousy about Dane Cook, but Dane had been around for a little bit. You see these like I said, 18-year overnight successes. But then here in the TikTok era, where you can have massive acceleration, and Matt Rife comes out of nowhere, and all the guys who've been doing it for 20 years get really jealous all of a sudden.
Yep.
Well, look, we're all trying to do the same thing. There's some alchemy of some combination of zeitgeist, the YouTube algorithm, Apple Podcast throwing you a favor for your show, my show, somebody else's show. Something's going to happen, and all of a sudden the numbers go from here to there.
Yep.
And you didn't get any better or worse. It's just, I don't know, some headline, some algorithm decided, oh, Letterman podcast,
yep,
with Jason Zinneman, let's move that to the top of the thing, and suddenly your listeners go tenfold. You didn't get any better, just luck. I don't know what that is. It's just the way the world works.
Yeah, and you brought up Dane Cook's name, and I think that's a really interesting one. A good friend of mine is on the finishing touches of doing his autobiography documentary, and I think it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be very interesting to see. I predict there's going to be a big time resurgence with Dane, because you think about this 03, this time you mentioned that he was one of the hits at that point for Sirius. That guy was huge. Like, there weren't a lot of guys or gals selling out arenas back then. And I mean, there's a guy who really was doing that at a time when it wasn't happening. Had his cooling off period, had his time. I loved when he was on Louis' show on IFC. It's IFC up here in Canada. I don't know if that's where it was down in the US, but and Dane went through his stuff. I expect there to be a resurgence for Dane Cook, and because everybody does love a comeback story, and there's a lot of those in comedy, aren't there?
And in nostalgia, you always want to tap the 20-year point. So we're right at the 20 years of Dane. He was great. Is he George Carlin? He's not George Carlin. He's not trying to be George Carlin. He's a fun storyteller. He brought to the stage a body language, the way he would prowl around the stage, a little bit more than, say, the generation that came before. He was easy on the eyes. He figured out social media before the rest of y'all did. Sorry, you're mad about that, but he played the game a little better. And did it help sell tickets? Sure, but you still have to get up there and perform. I could trick social media, get 18,000 people to come see me. I'm going to suck. I can't do an hour. So you still have to be good at it. But yeah, I'd love to see a little Dana-sance. That'd be fun.
A Dana-sance. Oh, you coined it right there. That's excellent. It's fun listening to some of the things that you do find joy in when it comes to comedy, and the asides that Daily Comedy Nudes goes down. And I've there was a bone that I had to pick with you with the SNL Hall of Fame. I loved that episode. I think that episode does a really, really good job of showing some of the fun things that you do. So you're listening to your Daily Comedy News. For me personally, I don't listen to them daily. I listen to them like once every 3 days, and then I do 3 of them at once. I listen to my podcast on double speed, and it's perfect. Like, it's just like one's not enough for me. I need 2 or 3 of your show to kind of scratch my itch. Because if I do listen to just one, you leave me wanting, which is also a good thing, by the way. But then you come out with these cool special episodes. Saturdays you'll come out with an episode like Alex Bennett's episode is a great example of that, where you go for an hour with him and you have long form, or you'll come out with special episodes like the SNL Hall of Fame episode. I loved that episode. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Do you have a lot of those kind of premises written down, and it's like, okay, yeah, this week we'll do this special one or that special one, or do they just literally come up? You hear the good idea. I think it was Kevin Hart that talked about the idea of the SNL Hall of Fame, and it was like, yeah, okay, let's just go from there.
So I'm making 365 of these a year, and I don't want to record every single day. While I love doing it, sometimes on a Saturday, I like doing something else, right?
Yes.
So I'll probably record 4 days a week, maybe 5. I quite openly try to do the weekends in advance. I use a program called Agenda, and I have a file for each day. So I'll have one for Friday, July 26th. And later today, when I'm done with you, I will write some stories that will go into that particular show. But along the way, I will collect some news that can wait. So-and-so has a special coming out April 3rd. Okay, let me open up the April 3rd doc, and I'll stick it there and save it for a rainy day. While I do that, I will see things like the top 25 stand-up comedians of all time. And I'll be like, all right, let me park that. And when I have some free time and I feel like I'm good on the mic on a particular day, because some days I'm just better than others, I don't know why.
Yep.
I'll be like, all right, let me bang this one out because I know I'm going to LA in October. So let me just park this and I'll just record it and I'll use it that day. So the weekend episodes tend to be slightly more generic, slightly recorded slightly more in advance, but specific to who should be in the SNL Hall of Fame. Yes, I was reacting to a Kevin Hart story that I saw maybe on a Thursday or Friday, and I'm like, oh, this would be good for. I lovingly call it weekend filler. Hopefully it's not just total filler, and apparently you really enjoyed the discussion, so thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
But and that was I didn't plan on making that as long as it was, but I guess when you read 150 names, even if you're just going yep, nope, nope, yep, it still takes 8 minutes. So then when I got through that segment, I had some leftover stories that can wait for a different weekend, and so I just moved those ahead to maybe the following Sunday. So that's where that came from. I do have a bunch of things squirreled away. I know I have some travel later in the year that I have planned. I haven't actually recorded them, but they're just sitting there to give me an extra show when I need one. I also have in the back end, I have some things that have been sitting there for 3 years, specifically the top 25 comedians of all time, which is probably dated now. There was this thing called COVID going around, and I assumed at some point I would lose my voice for 4 days. That luckily never happened. But I've got a few safety episodes sitting there, and luckily I haven't had to use them. I've been close. There was one I got stuck at the Anaheim airport all night and didn't have a show up, but they opened the airport lounge at 5 a.m. and I just fell on my sword and recorded an episode into my phone and had fun with it. That Letterman type inspiration of, hey, I'm here at the airport lounge and yeah, it sounds crappy. And the guy next to me is eating cereal, but let's do a show. And I think for one-offs, the audience gets it. It's fun.
Absolutely. And yes, I'm glad we've kind of circled back to that point. I'm a little spastic when it comes to this stuff when I get excited. And again, I'm extremely excited about your show. I'm glad we went back around to this point. You have this format and then you break the format and it's so fun. John Mulaney got married and you had a technological cratering of some sort on your end, but this happened. And so there's an episode that's, I don't know, a minute and a half long or something like that, where it's clearly recorded on a phone or something like that and saying, yeah, here's in the Daily Comedy News today, special episode. John Mulaney got married and you said what you knew and that was it. And that was the whole episode. I love that. It's really cool. And again, back to Letterman. Okay, we have a format. Now let's monkey with it. Let's break it. Let's turn it on its ear, whatever. And you have that in your show. Did that happen right away? Was that always part of the plan as you started it? Or was that something that evolved along the way?
I think that's always been in me, going back to the Dave influence. So the Mulaney episode specifically, my MacBook was breaking. The keyboard was shot. I bought a new MacBook and I was doing the migration thing. I had recorded the show for the day. Everything's fine. Let me have the old MacBook pass to the new MacBook, and that ties up both computers for 4 hours. And then I go out and I sat poolside and played on my phone. And I'm like, oh, John Mulaney got married. Kind of got to deal with that. So I just banged out the episode on the phone, no theme music, had no way to access anything and just put it out. The Letterman influence of, hey, let's just go with it. It's always been there. Something you mentioned earlier made me think of this. So back at Sirius on the Raw Dog Comedy Channel, our station voice was Satan. It was a character that Sal DeLeo, our imaging director, had done. And Satan, Raw Dog, Sirius 104. Hello, this is Satan. And we had an unofficial writer's guide in our head that although the character was Satan, there was nothing satanic about him. It wasn't about devil worship. We weren't trying to make a statement. The writer's guide was, he's a guy with a deep voice and we pay well. And that was the point of view on the character. Now, what happened as we wrote for that character over the decade is Satan became kind of my inner monologue combined with Sal's inner monologue. So if we thought something was stupid and we knew the audience would think it was stupid, we had the Satan character do it. For example, we were ordered to promote Oprah Winfrey Radio, which is, fine, love Oprah, but not sure the Raw Dog Comedy fans gave a hoot about it. But we had to promote it. So the way the promo went on air was like, hello, Satan here. The bosses have told us I have to read this memo. Sirius XM is very excited to announce Oprah Winfrey Radio launching August 1st. And then Sal would just read it in this most disenchanted way as Satan, and then crumple up the piece of paper on mic and throw it away, and then leave dead air and walk out of the room. And it was just our way of telling the audience,
Perfect.
like, look, man, we got to do this. We can't tell you what we really think, but we're telling you what we really think. And it was just fun. And that all gets back to that first 5 years of Letterman, kind of like, we're just doing this. We're making ourselves laugh. And if you're into it, fine.
That is so liberating, being able to do that, and it's fun, being able to think around corners. And again, that's another thing that they had to do. They had to think around corners back in the day. Johnny had a very specific set of parameters that they needed to stay away from, and it was easy, but it gave a framework. It gave a framework to say, okay, we're not going to have a monologue. We're going to do opening remarks. And here's what it's going to look like. And now it's the game is, okay, if it's only 3 or 4 remarks, how can we monkey with this and mess with it and make it more creative, more fun, more this, more that. It's I've said this to a lot of or I've asked this question, I should say, to a lot of the writers that I've talked to. Do you prefer having a wide open field, being able to do anything, or do you prefer a paddock where there are a specific set of areas that you have to stay between and you can't go around them? What would you rather write? And it's so funny how many of them would say, oh, I'd much rather parameters, because then you give them the parameters and that creates a second set of creativity that's there, other than just trying to find something funny, because now you're trying to find something funny around obstacles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'd all go like, oh, I'd like to be able to do whatever I want. But when you're in that box and you have to figure out, all right, what can we do within this box that's rascally and kind of misuses the original intention of the box?
Yep.
That's where the laughs come from. And it's that mischievous, rebellious little kid in all of us who's like, okay, you want me to do this? All right, I'll do it just the way you asked. Here you go. And it's just fun.
I want to go back to a couple of things you said. First off, the marathon, when you mentioned the marathon thing, that made me think back to an episode of SNL back in the day. I believe Kevin Nealon was on Weekend Update, and the whole thing was, we're interviewing the person that finished the marathon last. It's an inspirational. You think that it's the New York Marathon. The person who finished last, we're gonna have them on here, and it's gonna be an inspirational story. You're thinking, oh, it's somebody who might have challenges of some sort or impediments that cause them. And it's Chris Farley, and Chris Farley shows up, and he had spent the entire time partying, and he spent the entire marathon bar hopping, and so he finished the marathon after 20 something hours or whatever it was. And that just made me think of that. And that is springboarding into this question here. You have seen a lot of historical changes when it comes to comedy and cultural changes, and the cross point between the two. I think back again to those years of Farley at that point. Andrew Dice Clay, that was around the time that he had hosted Saturday Night Live, and a couple of the cast members said, no, we're not going to be a part of this, because he was so third rail controversial at that point, yet still selling out arenas. Comedy has always intersected with culture. Back then there wasn't cancel culture, but there certainly was PC culture. You've seen a lot of changes when it comes to that, from 2003 to where we are now, 20 short years later. I thought you might have a very interesting, unique standpoint on that.
It's interesting, whether it's music or comedy or pop culture. You go back and you look at these things that were so outrageous, like George Carlin has long hair. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Archie Bunker theoretically flushed a toilet upstairs because we heard it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And these things that you look at like now, like, wait, what? I've been on a MASH kick and it's gone the other way. Like,
oh yeah.
MASH was this funny show, and you look at it now and you'd be like, these guys are a bunch of jerks cheating on their wives, and they're alcoholics, and they're dumb, and let's cancel Hawkeye. And it's like, what's going on? Like, things have to live in their own time. You pull it a little bit forward, and comedy may have been a little edgier 10 years ago now because of, and this is a comedy interview, right? So we have to spend a few minutes on cancel culture.
Yeah.
This is the big bugaboo of, oh, you're going to be canceled, except, all the people that have supposedly been canceled are playing arenas. So somebody likes the jokes.
Mm-hmm.
what can you joke about? What can't you joke about? I believe in the theory that there's a way to make anything funny. I'll temper that by there are instances where maybe you want to wait a minute before you make the joke. But if we look very recently, there was a major political story, and somebody was killed during that event. There's nothing funny about that. But you wait 2 days and you look at the central character involved, who is a good comedic personality, and people found a way to make it funny. I'm not sure it would have been funny 2 minutes after, but 2 days later, there were ways to make jokes about it. So the bar's always moving, and these outrages come along. Oh, I can't believe so and so is doing such a thing, and you go back 5 years later, and the person's being lionized as a genius and a torchbearer.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how the pendulum swings. It swings so far in one direction, and then you get a bunch of people who are like, no, it's swung too far, and so they are over here doing their thing. And it might not be appropriate to do their thing yet, but at a certain point, the pendulum swings right back to that point, and it's very interesting to see that, and we've seen that so many times in our life, when you got these younger people who don't necessarily have that width and breadth of experience. They don't remember, Andrew Dice Clay. They don't remember some of these things back in the day, or Carlin, like you said. That's a great example as well. I think comedy, for me, I think there needs to be an element of comedy that is always pushing the boundaries. I think that for me, I'm a big free speech advocate, and comedy is one of the guardians of free speech. Unfortunately, it's a look at the people who are doing comedy. They're not really guardians so much, but at the same time, they are. It's such an important medium. And that's just the way I see it. I think it's a really, really important thing. I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned Matt Rife earlier. Do you watch a lot of these specials? Like, I know you have to kind of skim the surface because it's so big. There's so much now. And if you're doing a daily comedy news show, again, you've got stories that you don't necessarily get to every day. There's so much there. But do you actually watch a lot of these specials? Like, do you go down the rabbit hole with them?
I watch many of them, and I tend to gap them. And I try to be honest with the audience that, I do other things.
Yes.
And one of the things about being around comedy is often I'm not in the mood for comedy. Like, I've had enough of it for the day.
Yep.
So I'll often have a Saturday night where I'll be like, all right, let me watch the 3 major specials. Or if there's something really major, I'll watch it ASAP. But if something comes out, I'll catch up with it when I can. I'll watch a bunch. I'll update my list of the year. Along the way, I'll crib off other people's reviews just to tell the listeners what other people are saying. But it's a lot. And, where do you draw the line? Okay, yep. Netflix, sure. HBO, sure. Hulu in the fourth quarter is really going to bring it. They've hired Gaffigan and Burr and a bunch of other people. So Hulu's going to be a major player. But now, all right, somebody put out a YouTube quote unquote special. There, sometimes I'll wait to hear if I'm hearing buzz from other people about it. I probably could every night watch 3-4 hours of comedy.
That's why I asked, because there's a lot.
But I don't want to. And then back from the programmer's chair, it comes back to play the hits. So like I need to watch a live special by Cat Williams, because that's what everyone's going to be talking about. I need to watch the roast of Tom Brady. Do I need to watch something that came out on a Tuesday on YouTube? Maybe not immediately. I look at my role of I'm playing the hits for you along the way. I'm going to try and turn you on to some people that maybe you don't know, or maybe I didn't know, and I discover along the way. But yeah, I can't listen to 3-4 hours of stand-up every night. There's so much. I think there's something like 300 things have been released already this year.
Yep. Okay, so that gives me an indication. So Matt Rife's last special on Netflix, you watch that?
So yes, and what I will do, like a consumer, is I will hit play on something.
Yep.
And it is the job of the entertainment product, whether it's a podcast, including mine, a TV show, a music album, you got to keep me. And if you keep me, you go to the top of my list. And if I get 6 minutes in and decide, you know what, I'm not feeling this one, or it's not for me, or I'm not the target audience, or you're just not funny, or I don't like the way this one is shot, Rami Youssef, I bail. And you can come back and tell me, oh, dude, you should have stuck with it. The last 54 minutes are great. Or, oh, you should have stuck with the show. It gets really good in season 4. It's not 1985. I've got choices. I've got other things to do. EA's put out a college football video game for the first time in 11 years. I'm playing that every night now for 2 hours. So I'm not on YouTube watching comedians. We're all competing for attention. So if your special gets good in minute 8, sorry, I didn't see it.
Before I get back to the to that point, what platform are you playing the college game on? Are you a PS5 guy or an Xbox guy?
I was always a PlayStation guy, but Game Pass is just such a, no pun, game changer. That we have both systems, and I'm playing on Xbox because of Game Pass, it being quote unquote free as opposed to me shelling out $70. So I've become in this generation a big Xbox guy.
I have an Xbox Series X sitting in a box right now, literally, no pun intended, and I've got my PS5 that I've been playing, and so I know I'm gonna make a migration, and Game Pass is one of those things. I'm okay. I feel like we've done some good talking about this today. But to go back to Matt Rife for a second, the reason I'm asking, and to bring it back to the cultural thing that we were talking about earlier, I'm also watching folks who are calculated enough or seem to be calculated enough. And I wanted to know your perspective on this. You got this guy, Matt Rife, who has, I found out about Matt Rife from my wife, who's in her early 50s. Shocker. Not surprising at all. That's the audience he's cultivated. I know that he has gone and done made a career out of crowd work, and women who are of a certain age just seem to really gravitate towards him. And I knew that going into the special. Okay, so I kind of knew that. And when my wife says to me, hey, let's watch a comedy special tonight, I'm there. I'm just like that, because many times watching comedy specials, it's exactly the opposite. A new Burr special comes out. Candy, can we please watch this tonight? Can this be the show we watch tonight? And I'll have to convince her for it. Whereas she says to me, hey, Matt Rife's got a new special. I'm like, okay, let's do it. And watching the first 5 minutes of it, I don't know. I don't know if it's because I've got some pro wrestling stuff in my life, and I always think everything's a work. I'm a skeptic when it comes to some of this stuff, but I'm sitting there watching and listening to some of the things he's saying, and I'm like, okay, so within the next 5 or 6 days, there is going to be PC conversations that are happening, and 6 or 7 days after those conversations begin, he is going to be coming back with one-liners that absolutely decimate and just give him more and more and more and more and more from it. That was my first impression from that. And I think back to Dane Cook and what Dane Cook did with social media back in the day. And I think about his monologue on SNL and how he was taking the times and really making it part of his comedy to grow him as a brand, that sort of a thing. That was what I thought when I saw Matt Rife. Anything on that? Does that ring a bell with any comedy out there today?
So for all of us, including podcasters, right, you can play the game or not play the game. You can play the attention game. I could put out an episode titled Jim Gaffigan and the 10 most overrated comedians of 2024, right?
The headline game, the clickbait. Yep.
That'll make somebody go, what? That's outrageous. I hate this guy. And then I'll double down and be like, yeah, he's terrible. You know who else sucks? It's Bill Burr. He sucks too.
Yep.
And I guess I could be that guy and go for attention. And it might actually work. And then people will book me, be like, you don't think Bill Burr is funny? No, he's terrible, right? But it's not authentic.
Yes.
On the other side, Dave Chappelle. I could listen to Dave Chappelle all day, every day. He's compelling. Even when Dave gets up there and isn't even attempting to tell a joke and is just speaking about his point of view on whatever's happening in society, I find him compelling. I've been open on my show. I don't understand why Dave has chosen that his obituary is going to be Dave Chappelle, host of Chappelle's Show, known for something, transgender community, something. I don't know why he wants that to be his obit, but he seems to want to talk about that. But it's authentic. I think he should move off it. I don't agree with what he says, but it's authentic. And that I see, as opposed to manufactured comedy of, let me just say something outrageous and get noticed. Some of the comedians who are fighting against cancel culture just to fight against cancel culture, I'll show them.
Yes.
do you have something to say about Palestine, or are you just slamming the headlines so that you have a TikTok video?
Yeah. Oh, speaking, just to go back to that for a second here, isn't it interesting listening to Jerry Seinfeld, go up against hecklers? It's that's just been a lot of fun listening to that recently, because people are deciding to, come at him during his live shows. I don't know if you've heard any of that stuff. That's
Well,
really interesting to hear.
so when he first started getting heckled, it happened at a college commencement,
Yeah.
and Jerry was a little flat-footed and it was a little awkward.
Mm-hmm.
He's a master of his craft. He is. I didn't see some of the other comedians we've mentioned. I hadn't seen them live. The people I've seen live, Jerry is the best. Let me go on a Jerry tangent.
Yeah.
Just to bring it back to Letterman.
Yeah.
So when we would watch Letterman, to younger people, this is going to be like, oh, really? You knew he was good? Before the TV show, there were certain episodes of Late Night that I liked. I liked when David Sanborn sat in. It just brought an extra something.
Yep.
And then, I don't know, once a month, once or 2 months, this New York comedian, Jerry Seinfeld, would get on, and he was great back in that day. Great. All right. So bringing forward, Jerry does the commencement speech and gets kind of caught flat-footed, and it goes viral. And back to me. All right, there's a headline. Let me ride this for 3 days, right?
Yep.
But when Jerry went down to Australia, he had prepped some comebacks. So they tried to heckle him, and he slammed them back. And you don't think of Jerry as a heckle comedian, because why would he go to a Jerry Seinfeld show and heckle him? Right?
Yes.
It never came up before. But now that it's coming up, he's prepped for it, and he's armed. And shockingly, he's hilarious, right? He's the best at this. He spent 5 minutes and thought about, all right, how do I handle this? And he's great. It'd be like if you went to heckle Jim Gaffigan. Like, what would Jim even do in his persona? Like, he's got that soft-spoken persona. How would he encounter a heckler? I don't know.
And to bring it back to Letterman, I mean, that's some of the stuff that legends are made of, talking to some of his old friends about his time at the Comedy Store, and he's making his way through and trying to prepare these pieces of material. And if people turned on him or whatever, that's when the show really began. And the comics would come out of they would sit in the back and they would watch Dave do that. Again, the idea of somebody heckling Jerry Seinfeld is laughable in so many ways, but to actually see it happen and see him do this, that is so much fun. And these are the types of things that you cover. You talk about things that are happening in the comedy world, not just events, people getting specials and things like that, but you actually talk about that. Chappelle thing is so funny. You mentioned that. I've been thinking about that over the last few months, as a lot of people have, pondering, the how we got to this place and where and all that. To me, I don't know if it's necessarily just the trans issue. I think it could be any issue where somebody is trying to shut Dave up about saying what he wants to say. And I think he would come back with it with this much pushback, saying, you can't tell me that I can't say something. And by the way, I'm going to be funny while I do it. And I'm going to say what I want to say. And it could be any issue. It just happens to be this one. That was something that came into my head a few months ago. And I hope that I hope he doesn't die anytime soon, because I think you're right. If that were to happen, that would be part of the obituary. I think given enough time, hopefully he'll be able to move away from that. And there will be sort of a broader, and hopefully it is about free speech. I hope that it has become about that, where it's like, this was the issue that we talked about back then, similar to other comics back in the day in their career, like Carlin, for example. I just, it's a fascinating discipline, and I just love that there are guys like you out there talking about this every day. I love your take on Trump, how he's low-hanging fruit. I love how you talk about that, how it's a little bit different making fun of him now compared to back in the day when they made fun of, say, the caricature of Bill Clinton or George W. or Ronald Reagan, that kind of a thing. The political stuff in comedy. Isn't it interesting now how Carson and Letterman could just make fun of whoever was president? They didn't have to show their side, who, what they thought. They could say, Letterman famous during his late show years. And I don't even know about late night years. I don't even think he hardly talked about it. He just made fun of stuff. I'm a registered independent. But now all the late night guys or gals, where they stand politically. And is it because of who they work for? Is it because that's who they really are? That sort of a thing. politics in comedy has evolved significantly since you've gotten involved in it as well.
Yeah, I think specific to the current era, there were guys like Colbert and Kimmel
Yep.
who definitely have real opinions about Donald Trump and Donald Trump's presidency.
Yeah.
But if you go up a level and you look at the way Jimmy Fallon is doing Trump jokes,
Yep.
Trump is a character. He's got a particular style of speaking. He's got a particular style of haircut. There are just comedic elements to him, whereas, a different candidate just what would you make fun of? Like, we haven't yet figured out, how do you make fun of JD Vance? Hillbilly something, Mountain Dew something, I don't know. This week, well, how do we make fun of Kamala Harris? It seems to be that we're going to make fun of her laugh. But all right, it's dumb. It's already boring. So as we see more of Harris on stage, what elements of her personality do you goof on there? Whereas Trump, there's a lot there. I grew up in New York City. Here's this rich guy that nobody took seriously even back then. And, he's got his name on everything. Okay. And let's go see his Taj Mahal casino. God, this is gaudy.
Yeah.
Then he had his Apprentice persona. So, okay, you're fired. I actually, earlier today was prepping. We do another podcast called Ballot, which is a political podcast. Yep. And one of the topics in the episode we put out was how Trump is making fun of Harris. And so far, the best Trump has is calling her Lion Kamala Harris. And it's like, dude, that's lame. And he also made a "you're fired" joke. And as the writer, I pointed out, Trump making a "you're fired" joke is lame. Like, that's the joke we make of the Trump character. But now if you just going "you're fired," like, it's lame. But the other thing of playing in that arena these days, even on my podcast, is you worry, do you lean one way or another? Does the audience read something into it? Now, my perspective as I'm doing the show is I'm just looking to see what everybody else is saying and reacting to it. And I don't want people to go, oh, he's for so-and-so, so I hate this show now because of X. Now, look, I'm going to vote for somebody. You're going to vote for somebody. Now, hopefully, over the course of the 5 years of you listening to me every day, you've decided, I like Johnny Mack, and maybe we don't agree on this particular topic because you're for X and I'm for Y. That's fine. We could still be friends, right? The environment's gotten to this, like, I'm right, you're wrong, and I have to punch you in the nose to prove that you're wrong. And I don't know why we're there. I like the Fallon approach to Trump-based comedy that's more just about the character. I think back to hanging out with my friends, and we've talked about this. When we would goof on people, it was really not about the person. It was more about the absurdity. So like, for example, if we would just do a bit of like, if you started pretending to be Batman, we would be like, what an idiot. He has a beard. Batman doesn't have a beard. Like, so that's like, that's not making fun of you. It's not making fun of your beard. We're not saying your beard is dumb. It's just Batman doesn't have a beard. Mike's being dumb, pretending he's Batman. And it's just an absurd thing. We're not trying to be vicious. And I think that's where Fallon is coming from.
Oh, I'm so grateful to hear you talk about this that way, because there's something that I've been playing with this, and I put up I was looking on the other side of the set. I don't have it with me right now and with arm's reach. If I did, I would show it right now. The reason I would show it right now is because I love pissing off a certain percentage of my audience, as small as it is. It's so much fun. I've got a picture of Sarah Palin, and it says, "To the Letterman podcast, good luck with this." And this is underlined, like, it's very sarcastic, like, it's good luck with this. And I had a lovely conversation with Governor Palin and got her to sign the picture of it and whatnot, because, and I put up recently, even I put up, so the audience knows I have this, and it used to be, sometimes it'll show up on the set and I'll just have fun with it, because it's fun to piss people off. And I had this conversation with her and said, oh, one day I would love to have you on the show. And she just kind of looks at me and she just says, "You're bold. You're so bold. We're going to throw rocks at you." And I'm like, okay, well, first off, I'm Canadian, so I think I have a little bit of diplomatic immunity here on this or something. I'm not sure if that's how that works, but it might. And so, but the other part is, wait, hold on a second. There was something that happened within the Letterman mythos with her that literally transcended just folks who enjoyed late night television. It was an event they were talking about on CNN and all these things. There, she had half a dozen or so good-hearted people that protested and wanted David Letterman to get fired, and they talked about this to the point where the staff was like, "Oh, is this going to be a thing? Uh-oh." And then Dave actually came and did an apology, but it was one of Dave's apologies where the apology was there, but at the same time he still was able to kind of make his point. It was such a cool time. And I put in our Facebook group recently, even I put up a poll, should I, if I have the opportunity, should we have Sarah Palin on the show? And everyone was like, no, like it was overwhelming about how no it was, which makes me just want to go the other way and say yes and do exactly what you just said. Let's talk about this person, or talk to this person like they're a person, and let's talk about some of these events and not blow it up into what you were talking about. That can happen,
Maybe you have Sarah on and she's got some awesome Letterman stories and some awesome Letterman memories, and you don't have to get into the politics of any of it.
That's exactly right. Yes.
You don't have to get out. Hey, Sarah, thanks for joining the show. So we all love late night. What's your stance on abortion? Like, you're the Letterman podcast. It's not a political show. Talk to her about Letterman.
Yes.
I think she's another good example of political comedy. If we look at Tina Fey, the famous impression of Sarah, it's not mean. It's based on Tina looks enough like her and put on the right glasses and did kind of a you betcha kind of impression. Yep. There's nothing mean about that impression. It's just taking a over the top version of the character of Sarah out for a drive and having some fun with it and laughing at the camera, and we're all in the jokes. But I don't think that impression is mean by any happenstance. It's just fun.
I don't exactly. Well, and say, to the point where Sarah appeared on the show and they crossed paths and whatnot. I think, and so even if it was mean, having that person be able to come and elevate back, I can take the joke, I can take it on the chin, and we can do that. I think that's a fantastic example of that. I brought this up at this point because we do need to move to the close. I could talk to you all day about this. I'm very glad that we're connected. Like, John, I'm so glad that we're connected. Go ahead.
Let me be your Tony Randall, right? Anytime your guest cancels, you go, in case of emergency, I'll come on.
Oh, I love hearing that. Thank you for saying that here. I've got a couple questions here. And the first one is Letterman recently appeared on Daily Comedy News, and he was a story within the last few days anyway, he was. And so the overarching question I have is, in the last 5 years, the late night guys seem to appear sporadically. How many times has Letterman appeared at Daily Comedy News? Does it happen very often? But recently, the reason that he appeared is because he was going to actually, he has moved away. So he is so, it seems to be, if you watch My Next Guest and some of the things that he does say, even on his YouTube channel, he will talk about former President Trump with a tremendous amount of opposition, and that's something that is very new for Dave. For folks who have loved him for a long time, he usually doesn't weigh in on that kind of stuff. Yes, they made fun of George W. Bush, but who wouldn't make fun of George W. Bush? I'm sorry. The great moments in presidential speeches is, again, go to the Letterman YouTube channel. They got a super cut of it. It's one of the greatest things ever. Shout out to Tommy Ruprecht, who was the mastermind behind that. Just fantastic. But that was a different deal. Letterman has actually come out and opposed, former President Trump a lot, to the point where he was actually going to be hosting a fundraiser for President Biden. And now, of course, ripped from the headlines, President Biden has said he's not going to seek re-election. Dave appeared on the Daily Comedy News. So as a Letterman fan, when you see Dave appear in pop culture where you have a reason to put him into your show, does that provide a little bit of delight for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you're looking at Dave here, here's someone. I'll bring it back to where we talked about Jay Leno before. The Jay Leno that appeared on Late Night with David Letterman was a pretty edgy for the time comedian.
Yep.
But when he gets the Tonight Show, people might describe him as more vanilla. But Jay's got that edginess in him, or at least he did 40 years ago. And then but that's not the gig. I'm the host of The Tonight Show on NBC. I have to play to middle America. So here we see Dave, and we've gone through anti-establishment Dave, cranky Dave, establishment Dave. And now you have a David Letterman at a stage in his career where doesn't need the money, doesn't need the fame, doesn't care about the fame.
Yes.
So he's going to use whatever capital he has with his audience to influence the world the way he thinks it should be, the same as a Bruce Springsteen might do.
Yep.
And, okay. And if you're not down with Dave's messaging, well, don't go to the fundraiser. That's fine. And hopefully you don't go, oh, I can't believe Dave supported candidate X. Now I hate him, even though he made me laugh for 40 years. You can choose not to consume everything the man makes.
Yeah. Does he appear very often? Has he appeared in the last 5 years very often? Do you, on a slower news day and a new My Next Guest comes out, like when he had interviewed President Zelensky is probably a good example of that sort of thing. Does he appear very much on Daily Comedy News?
Only really when he's doing Netflix stuff, just because
Yep.
Dave doesn't do much. Now, during the pandemic, for weekend filler, it was for the 40th anniversary of Late Night. I did Sundays. I talked about Letterman for, I think, 5 straight weeks.
Oh, I got to go back and watch those. That's awesome. Okay, good. Thank you.
On a slow news day, after there are days, and we had one this week where there was nothing to fill at all. I'll go on Google and I'll be like, all right, Chappelle, nothing. Mulaney, nothing. Kreischer, Segura, Glazer,
no hits this week.
Letterman, and you just start going down, just trying to find something to give you enough critical mass. I don't really have how long is Daily Comedy News? It's however long it is on a particular day. At some point it's too long and I wrap and I bump stories. At some point it's too short because we're trying to make some money here. So we got to get some commercials in. So I can't stuff a 3-minute break into a 4-minute show.
Yep.
But I'll move stuff around. But this was a week where there was one day it was so slow, I actually had to pull forward some of the stuff I had stashed for a vacation later in the fall. But I told the audience, I go, today I've got exactly one story for you and the rest is filler. I don't try to snow people that not every episode is awesome, right? Some are better than others.
You're preaching to the choir, my friend. You're preaching to the choir.
You've done around 150 of these now, right?
Yeah.
This might be the best episode, the worst episode. It's probably somewhere in the middle. I hope it's not the worst. It might be number 149.
Not even close. Not even close.
Some shows are better than others, and some days you feel good and the topic is right, and other days it's just not there, and that's okay. Way back in the 90s when they taught me about talk radio, don't oversteer one show. It was great or that one was terrible. It's the series of shows. It's the body of work. If we look at the first 5 years of Late Night with David Letterman, some of them were awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were flat. And Dave tried to save it by admitting that it was flat. Let me see if I can pull this back to okay. And maybe those are our favorite episodes, the ones that didn't work.
Yep.
But you look at the body of work, and we're looking back at the body of work going, that was great, rather than, oh man, the August 2nd episode was terrible.
Yeah. Well, Colbert talks about that. He calls it the tissue box. You pull out a Kleenex and there's always another Kleenex. That's what the shows are for them. Dave, famously talks about some of the mental health stuff that he went through in figuring it out. But one of the things that helped him get through that was knowing, well, okay, there's always another show. There's always another show. There's always another show. And looking at it, the long game, thank God, I think about, if I have any skills at this whatsoever, I go back to give myself context. I go back to my first episodes. I host a men's mental wellness podcast as well. And I go back to my very first episodes of those. Those were my first episodes I ever shot. It's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, there's progression here. Thank goodness for that. Context of longevity is very, very important. And yeah, that's a great point. Now, that being said, again, some of these special episodes that you do, I want to bring it back to, I want to finish with Daily Comedy News because it is so good. And I'm not just saying this. Like, when you talk about the Hank Azaria stuff, or Hank Azaria doing the Bruce Springsteen thing, or the Weird Al, some Weird Al stuff, where you spend a little bit of time on one of these topics. I don't know if they are slow news day items or not that you're putting in, but I'm sure grateful for it. Bob Newhart passing. I don't know if there was a slow news day, which is why you added maybe an extra episode or a little bit of emphasis, a little exclamation point on some of these events or some of these things that are happening. I, as the viewer or the listener, am grateful for it because you're putting emphasis on it. The Hank Azaria Bruce Springsteen thing is one of the funniest things I have seen in for a long time, and I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for your show. So you're doing the Lord's work by doing this, Johnny. Like, seriously, I'm really appreciative of what you're doing.
Oh, thanks, man. So the Azaria thing. So Hank Azaria is doing an Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band cover band where he's staying in character as Bruce, except when he tells the stories, they're not stories of Bruce growing up in New Jersey. They're Hank Azaria stories. So I saw this and I'm a big Springsteen fan. I'm like, this is going to be terrible. But I clicked on the video and Hank does a really good Bruce Springsteen impression. I played a clip of Hank singing Glory Days. And you can tell that Hank has listened to a ton of live Springsteen because he's hitting the vocals the way Springsteen does in a live version of Glory Days 40 years later.
Yep.
And although you wouldn't have thought this in 1989, Hank Azaria and Bruce Springsteen look similar-ish these days. So it kind of works. So that was a story that I was genuinely really excited to share. But that week was a busy news week. I had it in Thursday's show and bumped it. I had it in Friday's show and bumped it again. And then I made sure I got it in on Saturday. But that was one that I was excited about, but could wait because other things were going on, whatever happened that week. Specific to Newhart, anytime a comedian that big passes away, I try and do immediately a quick obit episode just to get it out there. I normally record the show around early afternoon for the next day, but if something big breaks, Bob Newhart passes away, okay, here's an all-timer, I try and do a quick obit episode. That usually then gets wrapped around the normal episode because on that particular day I'd already recorded, I think it was the Friday episode, and no mention of Newhart, so I just put a lazy, hey, I didn't mention Newhart today, but check out earlier in the feed, I did an obit. And then I try and come back and do the reaction episodes specifically to see what the other comedians have said about whoever has passed away. And those episodes, no surprise, do really well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And they catch people up. And again, like, you're a torchbearer for this stuff because, there are people that influenced us. We're kind of in that place right now. And it's a sad place. I was just talking with one of the members of Paul's band recently about this. And their remark to me was, you got kind of a sad gig, Mike. Like, I know it's happy and I know you've had some good things happen and great things are happening, but you've got kind of a sad gig because we're all like I think about Rick Sheckman, who the show doesn't exist without Rick. And I think about him every single day. And now I'm at the place where I've done more episodes. Rick, of course, produced for Letterman for 32 years. He was the film coordinator, but he was way more than that. And Alex's best friend, by the way, as well. Alex and Rick. You want to catch up with Alex and get him to tell Shecky stories. You'll be there all night. It's amazing talking to him. But this band member remarked to me, he goes, "You got a sad gig because a lot of the people that you look up to, you're going to be tributing posthumously, and you think about what you're doing as well. 03 Sirius, you're sowing these seeds, you're loving this idea of comedy, but a lot of the people that you do look up to, like, that is what your gig is going to be with this amazing, indispensable, as far as I'm concerned, brand you're creating.
It goes with the field. If I look back on my career, the most exciting day in my career was September 11th, 2001. A horrible day, but in terms of, we create the art of radio, and I was in New York City and we could see the towers out the window. There was a big bay window behind the studio.
Yeah.
And we weren't watching it on TV. We were looking at it, doing radio. That was, it sounds weird, but I think you get where I'm coming from. That
absolutely
was the day where we did the craft. This is what we do, and today we're doing it.
Yeah.
You don't want these things to happen.
No.
I I really took a level up in my career. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing happened on a day. WR was having a sales event. So anybody who was anybody was at the sales event in New Jersey, and they left us part-timers around, and that happened, and everybody's rushing back from New Jersey, but suddenly I'm producing Afternoon Drive for the first time because I'm a live body and someone has to do it. That's another day in my career I look back to. So, sometimes opportunity knocks and you jump on these things. I was looking at the recent assassination attempt and some of the people who got on air because they happened to be at work on a Saturday at 6:05 while Anderson Cooper was out at the Hamptons. But hey, man, need you to anchor this right now. Let's see what you got. And these things accelerate your career. In terms of doing obituaries, well, of course you don't want to do them, but it kind of forces your hand. Nobody was thinking like, oh, I should do a Bob Newhart retrospective. And if I had done a Bob Newhart retrospective, it probably wouldn't have done well. I don't want to jinx anyone. I could pick a name out of a hat and go, oh, you know what? On Sunday, I'm going to talk about somebody's career for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it would just be filler. And if I hand in the same exact episode after the person dies, oh, that was really great. It's just, I don't know. It is what it is, right? A musician's going to die and suddenly, oh, wow, I can't believe how much I really love the music of X. Let's listen to that person all weekend. Well, the music's there today. Why aren't you listening to it today? I don't know. I'm just not. I'm doing something else.
But it's but at the and that's a great example. Fairly recently at the time of this broadcast, Sinead O'Connor passed. Like, it's not that long since, and that's one who I have loved. Sinead O'Connor, the ups, the downs, all of it, always loved her. And one of the things that I didn't like, to bring it back to music and what you said earlier, sometimes, the people who love something so much, they hold on to it and they take ownership of it. They want to protect it in art. And then something like this happens. And then all these Johnny Come Latelys come in. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I want to express how I really feel about this and be precious about it, while all this noise is happening in the background. And I feel like that is who you are when it comes to comedy, listening to you talk about Newhart the way you did. And I am going back into the archives. Like, I'm back 4 or 5 months already since I've become aware of you. And I do want to go back and listen to some of these shows that you talked about, Letterman, back in the day. I'm really grateful for what it is that you're doing, John. I really, really am. And thank you very much for taking time today. I know how many plates you have spinning. I don't know how you are able to do all the things that you do. But you just have this drive, and it's amazing. And you've taken some of that precious time and you've given it to us today at the Letterman podcast. And yeah, man, we could definitely use a Tony Randall. And thank you thank you so much for reaching out to me originally and giving me the gift of your show. It has penetrated that shield, and it really is. I could not endorse the Daily Comedy News more, and I know that that's just the crust of what it is that you're doing. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thanks. You make me laugh about fandom. So someday when you're running Letterman Fest at the big convention hall,
yep,
we'll see the different camps. So me and the cool kids will be over here in the corner wearing our Chris Elliott t-shirts, and we're gonna hate on the people who like visiting the Hello Deli and be like, that part was stupid. That's when Dave sold out and he wore Armani and he's wearing shoes and you don't know the real Dave. And then there are gonna be other people who only know him from Netflix who are gonna look at us old people, and that's what fandom is. And the spirit of Letterman Fest would, I think, be to appreciate David Letterman, even though I'm going to be wearing the Chris Elliott t-shirt hating on the newer people.
Couldn't have said it better. And it's like you've done this before. Segue, the Letterman podcast has one sponsor only. That is hello-deli.com. Rupert may not own the deli anymore, but guess what? He owns the brand. Guess why? Because Dave is awesome, and he gave it to him when he retired. So the only place to get official Late Show with David Letterman merchandise is hello-deli.com. Rupert G himself packs it with care, and he won't add onions to the order anymore, but at the same time, they'll smell better. Go to hello-deli.com. And this has been another episode of the Letterman podcast with Mike Chisholm. That guy there is Johnny Mack. Thank you, and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.